movement, we only ever see images in black and white. And so even if some of these images are colorized after the fact, and maybe they have been, like they have TV shows like World War II in color, right? I've always found that seeing something in color brings it to life a lot more. So where I've been able to find famous images colorized or shot in color, as some of them were, it's not like it wasn't the case, I have tried to include those a little bit today. So you will see some images like that. And then we'll also watch MLK's I Have a Dream speech, and somebody did a great colorization of that too. So that'll be really cool to see as well. It's really, really kind of interesting to see a lot of these things. So let me pull this up. All right, so today we're talking day 2, civil rights. Momentum is gaining ground. This is an image that you're going to see, or that you've probably seen many times, talking about like sit-ins, talking about the violent nature of a lot of these things. Not always brutality, but sometimes just straight up like bullying, like harassment overall, dumping milkshakes on people, black and white, right, in sit-ins many times too. Harassing crowds, right, mob kind of activity. So you do see this a lot. Sit-ins are kind of a big thing in today's topic. The first thing that we're going to talk about is sit-ins in Greensboro. We'll talk about the SNCC, Freedom Riders in Alabama and Mississippi. We'll talk about James Meredith very, very briefly. And then the March on Washington. I tried to gather as many like in-color photos of the March on Washington as I could, because it's like really, it is really genuinely cool to see this stuff in color. It makes it, again, way more real to you, I think. At least that's the way that I feel, especially being somebody who's, you know, you guys and I, we're not that far in age apart, you know, so I think that we have the same kind of appreciation for some of the things that feel older in history, whereas maybe some of your other teachers are a little bit closer to that as well, you know. So I think I feel a very similar appreciation for these images as well. We have the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as well. There is no exit ticket today. Got rid of that. Don't worry about it. The one from the other day was extra credit. If you didn't do it, you can do it today. And then I'm just going to give you guys time to work on that Unit 10 project. Somebody already like turned it in. I haven't looked at it yet, so I don't know if it's like a good one or not. But that tells me that maybe it's not super difficult if you just go through and take your time on it. The biggest thing, like I said the other day, is the whole MLA format thing. See it as a practice opportunity more than anything else. Don't stress out about it until you're like pulling your hair out, because that's something you'll do in college, right? So don't worry about that yet. Just see it as practice, okay? Sound good? Okay. So we have sit-ins. Sit-ins, and it's like, again, this image is originally, I think, in black and white, but I found a colorized image of it as well. And I think that this does, again, a really good job of portraying this picture. So we have the Greensboro sit-in in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1960. The waitress refused to serve 4 black students lunch at Woolworth's, so they sat until close. And again, it's always ironic to me as well, you know, you'll have a African-American or black staff, yet you won't serve African-American people at your diner, at least maybe not in those seats in some areas of segregated diners as well, you know, maybe different sections where African-Americans are being forced to sit. So this is a form of peaceful protest. And one of the things that again, is really interesting to see is just how well these peaceful protests work, right? Obviously, you have advocates for maybe more violent tactics as well. And as we talked about with MLK, MLK is not, you know, ignorant to the fact that it is difficult to do peaceful protests. He knows it is a tough thing to do. He knows that you have to be, honestly, in many cases, a lot more courageous to just sit there in the face of racism and violence and not respond in turn. I mean, we saw the image in the very beginning of this, people sitting there, not reacting, just taking it while people dump like milkshakes and fries and other food on them, right? It's just straight up harassment and kind of, you know, assault in many ways. But the thing with positive and kind of peaceful protests is that it spreads like wildfire, right? Violence can as well, but on the similar vein, peaceful protest does just the same. It encourages others to participate in sit-ins across the nation to fight segregation. There's different things like wait-ins where you have like separated beaches and people go and they do like sit-ins basically at a beach. There's read-ins at segregated public libraries. In this situation, day 2, you know, at day 1, it's these four guys right here, and then day 2, 20 people are there. day 3, 60, and then day 4, 300. So many so, in fact, that there was not enough room in Woolworths for the sit-in protests that they had to spread to other segregated restaurants as well. So this is very effective, and you'll see that many of the things that we look at today, though it is often met with violence, there is real, tangible, positive results that do come from this. Eventually, this is, I don't remember exactly what month this started in, but it is desegregated, this restaurant, on July 25th. Yet another example of a peaceful protest leading to real results. And then in a different act too, the all-black staff, well, not all-black staff, but the black staff members were served first, right? So maybe in a different show of a somewhat positive recognition there as well. SNCC, this is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the student organization to defeat white racism and obtain equality. This is another kind of nonviolent protesting group. With them, this is one of those different cases where we're seeing students get involved. We're seeing people of higher education and education in general getting involved. High school levels as well, there are organizations too. But with the SNCC, this is just a great example of people in education banding together for protests across the country, different colleges, often black and white, especially given the nature of education during the time. And this is something that you'll see is NAACP supported. So you have different organizations supporting this as well. You have the nonviolent protests that they're coordinating in this specific case is coordinated over Easter weekend, which, given the nature of MLK and his background and many of his followers, there is often a religious undertone to some of these things too. So maybe also utilizing in an effective strategy the religious kind of background of Easter weekend and of Easter Sunday to further make a more effective nonviolent protest, right? So that is something that you see there too. And then you have Ella Baker. She's involved. She's the leader of the SNCC. Her grandfather was a slave, and she is a member of the NAACP. So she obviously, as if she didn't have enough ties already to the civil rights movement, she has even more backing there as well. Not to say that there would be any question to her legitimacy, but she's absolutely got everything that you might need or require in somebody who's going to lead an organization like this. We have the Freedom Riders. This is happening in the American South in 1961. Boynton v. Virginia ruled segregation on interstate buses to be illegal, which is an interesting thing because it's an interstate bus. This is going through states, so this is something that we're seeing across the country. All right. So with this, the Freedom Riders are now challenging the enforcement of federal law by riding buses from D.C. to New Orleans. They sat in the front of the bus. They used white restrooms at bus stations. This started on May 4th. So coming up soon, next month will be kind of the anniversary there. With 6 white, 7 black Freedom Riders leaving D.C. This is, again, yet another show of racial unity, which is sending a pretty powerful message to the rest of the country. This is something that is documented in the news. It's something that we see in, on film, videotape images and stuff like that is kind of being spread around. So again, we're seeing, I know that we talked about last class with Emmett Till, bringing together tens of thousands of people, both black and white, and now you have the Freedom Riders. So it's another kind of solid example of seeing how this is working out. I tried to get, again, I got a in-color image here if I could. So one bus is firebombed, and so this is something you're going to see, is that, again, this is nonviolent protest, this is peaceful protest, often met with violence itself. And that is, again, why MLK has those 6 principles, and it is, again, also why MLK knows and he recognizes and understands that this is not an easy battle. This is a difficult battle. It's a long journey. It's a battle that takes patience and courage, and it's looking in the eyes of danger and racism itself and still being able to sit there with solidarity. It's a difficult thing. So with this, one bus is firebombed and the other bus is attacked by an angry mob by pro-segregationists, so people who are pro-separation, basically. President Kennedy, who has long been a pretty decent proponent of civil rights, sends troopers to protect the riders. With that, they achieved the goal of compelling a reluctant federal government to enforce desegregation. So yes, the federal government is reluctant, though you can see there is some decent, whether or not it's from political pressure or not. It might be, and many times it probably is, and other times, I don't know Kennedy personally, I didn't quite get the chance. So yes, there's probably some political pressure there. I'm certain of it. But at the same time, Kennedy does, regardless of reasons why, he does introduce some pretty sweeping civil rights legislation, and then also LBJ afterwards as well, kind of finishing off what Kennedy puts in motion. So with that, again, it's the Freedom Riders are having real, tangible results. And though they have to sit through things like violence and racism and threats and firebombing and KKK rallies and people coming after them, the overall end goal is they achieved what they wanted. But at the same time, there is an issue here. And this is why it's like everything, there's a little bit of give and take throughout a lot of these years. So this came with a deal that was worked out. So it comes with a deal with Mississippi. Mississippi would enforce desegregation. So they're going to go through with it. They will. And they said, if the federal government would lay off combating protest arrests for disturbing the peace. So effectively, a compromise is given to Mississippi more leeway to fight the civil rights movement on different fronts, but they give up their kind of hold on interstate buses. Does that make sense? It seems to be the government's going to be a little bit more hands-off when it comes to, posing and, arresting individuals for picketing and holding signs, things that are constitutional violations to arrest people for doing so. The government's going to kind of hands-off on that as long as buses are desegregated. So it's kind of like solving one problem to open up doors to another. However, I don't want to take away from the positive aspect that does come from the Freedom Riders. A serious kind of goal was accomplished here, and this is really good progress for the movement for sure. We have James Meredith. He's an Air Force veteran. Meredith, this is an example again of kind of integration in schools. We saw integration on the public school system level. Now we're going to see some integration on the university level. Meredith is an Air Force veteran. He wanted to attend the all-white University of Mississippi. Now, I don't know too much about this story. With this, I know that we talked about like Rosa Parks and how that is somewhat coordinated as like a coordinated attempt to set up and garner, recognition for civil rights violations with the bus boycott, things like that. So I don't know, maybe that's a similar thing here, but Meredith, being an Air Force veteran is always something like that. We know the context and the nature of our society. We know the context of our country, the way that our country tends to value military service. That is something that probably plays a role in maybe garnering some more support as well. Either way, he wants to attend the all-white University of Mississippi. This is Ole Miss, by the way. The NAACP representation, Medgar Evers, won the federal court case to desegregate Ole Miss, which is a huge deal, right? It's a huge deal, but at the same time, it's no real difference in many ways than what we're seeing with Orval Faubus in the Little Rock, Arkansas situation, where he's got a lot of resistance. However, to my knowledge, I don't believe that there is a National Guard called in for this one. But there is still obviously some danger, violence, and racism that James Meredith might be subjected to. So federal marshals are sent to protect Meredith and kind of also deal with the resistance from Governor Ross Barnett. So we do have resistance here, but I would say it's probably not as much resistance as the Little Rock Nine, right? But at the same time, that doesn't mean that there's not severe racism, violence, discrimination. The thing that I think a lot of people overlook with these situations is that even when James Meredith gets into the school, same thing with Elizabeth Eckford, when they get into the school system, that doesn't mean that the problems go away. That just means that they're in the school system, right? And that also, I don't want to overshadow how genuinely brave the Little Rock Nine and how genuinely brave people like James Meredith have to be the leaders in the forefront of these movements to go and say, hey, I'm going to be the one to put myself on the line. Because, again, the violence during this time and violence in our country even today, obviously, it's a dangerous thing to do. But many people are looking at this and they're saying, hey, this is a sacrifice that I'm willing to make to move forward with the civil rights movement. And it's to say maybe, having people like MLK as a leader of the movement, giving that hope and that inspiration to many is probably a big reason in a lot of this as well, let alone the years and years of racism that many people are just fed up with at this point. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly. And even with the federal marshals there, it's not like, it's a protect all thing. Who knows? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We have Birmingham, Alabama, 1963. This is where you're going to see like all of your, for lack of a better word, like more iconic images from the civil rights movement. You're seeing some serious violence in Birmingham. Not that you're not seeing it everywhere else, but this is stuff that is, again, captured on film. And the one thing that we talked about with Emmett Till and the rise of television as well is that you're losing that excuse as a white neighbor to say that I've never seen racism, I've never seen violence. You're losing that excuse, right? And many people did make that excuse. I've never dealt with that, right? You deal with that. People say that today, right? You lose that excuse, especially when this is captured on film. When Emmett Till's casket is held, open casket, and tens of thousands of people in the media and everybody reports on it. That already BS excuse is now, it's disappearing, all right? So you're now having more people seeing these things. You're seeing the way that protesters, nonviolent protesters, are being met with violence themselves. MLK is here, right? MLK arrives. The big man on campus comes through, kind of like the big backup. MLK Jr. and the SCLC work to promote civil rights in the most segregated city in the South. So Birmingham is a hotbed for the civil rights movement. We have things like sit-ins and marches, obviously peaceful protests. You have the police chief, Bull Connor, a pretty awful guy. City says the city is prohibiting demonstrations and use police dogs and water hoses. Obviously, again, it's really kind of crazy to see everybody's always up in arms about our Constitution. It's my constitutional rights, right? And at the same time, this is happening in the United States. This is a violation of people's rights to protest. It's a violation of people's rights to assemble. At this time, it's as if people are like, well, the Constitution only applies to me, right? Because I'm not in the minority, right? And that's what you're seeing a lot of the times. Also, MLK, with a big kind of power move there, getting arrested as well. I'm certain that MLK is he's kind of used to the police system at this point and dealing with the police in many ways. MLK is arrested, and that is where in the Birmingham jail, is where he writes his kind of famous letter from the Birmingham jail. Also, brutality is sparking more participation in the movement. Like I said before, people are seeing this, open eyes. There's no more sweeping this under the rug. There's no more denying this violence and racism in the country. With this, people are seeing this, and it's bringing more momentum. Just like I said the other day, obviously, you don't want to sit around and try and at all find something of value out of the situation of Emmett Till, but at the same time, as Emmett Till's mother knew, something of that nature and opening people's eyes to the brutality of that can bring momentum to the movement, can bring more participation to the movement. So again, not to say that there's anything really, it's a terrible thing, obviously, to see people dealing with things like this, but at the same time, when others see it, it does bring more people into the movement. It gains momentum, right? So that's something to keep in mind. This is the letter from Birmingham jail. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. This is a very easy to see situation as well. African Americans are fed up with the argument of just wait, things will get better, right? And still, again, to this day, we're fed up with the arguments of just wait, things will get better, It's getting to the point where wait is sounding more like it'll never come around, right? So that's something that is maybe to be taken away from this as well. This is a really, really popular, very well-known letter, and even more so, again, the fact that MLK is putting himself on the line, a prominent figure in the civil rights movement. He's been arrested, and he's now in jail as literally like the numero uno leader of the civil rights movement. This is kind of, again, awful thing, of course, but bringing more momentum to the movement. That's the wonderfully interesting thing about the civil rights movement. It's almost like the more violence, the more anger that is directed at African Americans, the stronger the movement gets. And I think that that's something that MLK advocated for a lot, especially with his idea of nonviolence. You know, the more that this happens, and it's not to say again that this is a positive thing, but the more that you see this, the more that the issues kind of rise and compound on each other, and the more situations are arising and happening, the stronger the movement gets overall. And it's really kind of interesting to see how that plays out. And it's also interesting, I think, to see how the movement grows over the years, right? And it grows exponentially, very, very rapidly. President Kennedy, again, like I said, whether some of this is from political, pressure, maybe just being prodded all the time by people like MLK and other leaders of the movement. When are you going to do something? When are you going to do something, right? Whether it's from that or whatever, it doesn't really matter at this point. President Kennedy did promote civil rights in many ways. Civil rights being painted more as a moral issue now, we're seeing. And also the fact that the nation has an obligation to fulfill its promise of giving all Americans equal rights and opportunities. This is a big thing. Looking at this for what it is. You know, a moral issue. It's not a legal issue. This is ethics. This is morals. This is it's deeper than, a legal distinction. There shouldn't be a legal distinction, right? So we do see that. And then finally, well, I think I have two more slides maybe, but this one I think is we get to the more kind of interesting things to see here with the March on Washington. Americans come together in 1963, Washington, D.C. Americans put pressure on Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act. Again, like I said, it's not like Kennedy was immediately like, I'm going to pass everything and I love civil rights, right? Yay! It's not like that. There's a lot of pressure that's put on. There's a lot of, work that is done in order for this to happen. Yeah. Yeah, of course. So again, it's not like everybody in the federal government is like, yeah, let's just do it. That sounds good. It takes years, right? It takes years and it takes a lot of work. So it's not to paint Kennedy as some like superhero at all, right? But he does eventually do the right thing. So there needs to be some credit given there at least. 200,000 diverse Americans, right? So this is again seeing a unity between black and white, Latino, right? Everybody kind of coming together, Asian as well. Peaceful demonstrations, again, not riots, not any sort of even real protest. It's just, again, more peaceful demonstration. People sitting around, people picketing, they'll have, signs. We'll see some images of that too. Groups like the NAACP, the SCLC, the SNCC, all coming together to kind of talk, to listen to MLK as he addresses a crowd of 200,000. Again, this is a really interesting thing too. It's one of the largest demonstrations in American history. And on top of that, it exceeded expectations by like 100,000 people. They only expected about 100,000 people to show up, which in itself is a large amount of people. So for 200,000 to show up, it's pretty insane. And it, again, exemplifies the strength that the civil rights movement has gained over the years. So here's some images that I found. Again, whether they were shot in color or colorized after the fact, either way, all it does, I think, it does a good job of serving to bring this to light, bring it to life as well. People demanding voting rights. Obviously, we know there's the amendment that guarantees African-American suffrage, but at the same time, there's things like the poll tax, literacy tests, things that are designed for failure, essentially. So people are not voting even though they're supposed to be able to. It's, again, like legalized racism, legalized discrimination. More images, again, people holding up picketing, fences. You can see black faces, white faces all throughout the crowd. So you have more, again, unity as well. This is a very, very diverse crowd that you're seeing in this 200,000, right? So that in itself is something that you probably wouldn't have seen 10 years ago, right? It's a lot of the momentum that's built over time, a lot of the changes that have happened in the year. It happens in such a rapid period of time. It is really a incredible kind of accomplishment. Here's some more. Here's people sitting. Has anybody ever been to Washington, D.C.? No? Good luck going anytime soon. Probably like 5 years from now we can go. Who knows? Because there was just another guy that ran his car into like a barrier or something. Not a third one, but the second one. So it wouldn't surprise me if it's going to be a hot minute before you can go. I went, fortunately. Surprisingly, I almost went at the worst time too. I went with my mom, I think in like 2011 or something, somewhere around there. And when I went, it was like, I think we got there like, do you guys remember the big government shutdown? Probably not. So the government shut down at a certain point, and it does every once in a while, but this was like a really long one, and it was like out of place entirely. And I went to Washington, D.C. With my mom. We spent a week there. We went to like all the museums and everything like that, and then we left. And 2 days later, the government shut down. And so when the government shuts down in D.C., everything closes. Everything. All the museums, anything that you would go to D.C. to see closes. So I was like, just made it. So I at least got a decent experience with D.C. If you can go there at some point and you enjoy history at all, or you enjoy the history of our nation, or you like anything about government, or like seeing any of that stuff, it is really, really a really amazing place to go to, especially if you like museums. But I'm also a huge nerd, so if you guys like that, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Who knows? So here's some more. This also interesting to see. We demand decent housing now. We saw again, we're seeing a lot of redlining during this time. We're seeing a lot of discrimination in housing, racism in housing. We have white flight to the suburbs and African Americans not being allowed into many white communities, which leads them often to being put into poorer housing as well, just bad housing in general, because that's the only thing that is available to them. And then we also know that a lot of African Americans are being denied well-paying jobs too, which leads to, in many cases, sometimes things like generational poverty. And it's something that still affects many African Americans today. With this, we have more images, kind of like bus rides. Civil rights plus full employment equals freedom. Full employment, right? So we're thinking about jobs as well. People kind of putting their feet in. I don't know how much I would do this today, but my feet probably aren't going in there at all. But they can if they want. I don't know if you guys want to do that. Feel free. It was probably a hot day. Who knows? All right. So here is an image, or sorry, a video of MLK's "I Have a Dream" speech. This is the second to last thing that we'll do, and then I'll give you guys the rest of the time in class to work on your project. This is about 7 minutes long. So you'll probably have about 30 minutes to work on your project, I'd imagine. So let's go ahead and watch this really quick. Yeah, I found it. I think it's if you didn't know that it was a
I think personally having and seeing like these pictures in black and white makes you feel like, oh, this is like the 1800s.
Yeah.
That was forever ago. Like,
Yeah.
you know what?
Yeah, honestly, I feel the same way. So that's also a reason why I thought it was, and it's not to say that, again, that all of these things, oftentimes they were in fact shot in black and white. However, there are still images that you can find, of course, of the civil rights movement in color. It's not like, it's a weird crossover time between black and white and color, but at the same time, throwing that out the window anyways, seeing images like this, especially in color, I agree entirely that it brings it to life so much more. And to see somebody like MLK, for me, my entire schooling, I had only ever seen civil rights images in black and white, unless I was watching like a movie that was reenacting something that had happened. So yeah, I absolutely agree. Looking at old history, when it's not really that old, is especially when this is a contemporary issue as well, still, seeing it in color and seeing it for what it is, it's no different than looking at that show World War II in color as well. Not that old, and I think a lot of people lose sight of the fact that a lot of the history that you discuss in school, and the fact that it is the word history, makes you feel like it is ancient, but it's not, right? It really isn't. So yeah, that's why I try to use some of these images when I can, even if they are colorized after the fact. It doesn't change it. This is what people look like. This is what life looked like, and it looks very similar to life that you live now because it is similar. There are some cultural differences between the 60s and obviously the 2020s, but at the same time, it's a lot of the people that you know in your life may have lived during this time too, and they're living through this life as well. So yeah, great point. Absolutely, I agree. So finally, last thing here, we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So important to note at this point that JFK had been assassinated in 1963, November 1963. I think it was 22nd or 23rd, one of those days. So really close to 64. Lyndon B. Johnson takes over and took the initiative to finish what Kennedy had started, and he pushed through the bill through Congress. This banned segregation in public facilities and gave federal government the power to desegregate schools. So it gives a lot more power to the federal government to actually enforce a lot of these things. Important to note as well, banning segregation in public facilities. We saw with Brown v. Board that segregation in schools is basically outlawed, but at the same time, when the Chief Justice comes through, he says that separate but equal has no place in public schools. But he doesn't say separate but equal has no place in society. He says in public schools. So you still have things like separate diners, separate bathrooms, separate bus routes that are eventually changing over time. But this in itself is a very sweeping, broad-reaching legislation that is targeting a lot of those things. So it's doing real immediate change. And it's not, again, that situation of with all deliberate speed where you take as much time as you want. This is now the federal government coming through and saying, hey, if you don't do this, this is a federal law that we have now the power to enforce, and we will enforce it. Though, obviously, at the same time, it's not like this stuff is today it's signed, tomorrow it's fixed. That is not the case, right? However, in many states, you do see like an immediate change, but other states, obviously, still plenty of time before things are actually changing. So that is what we have. Again, like I said, no exit ticket. Just work on your Unit 10 project, and that's pretty much all we have for today. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah. Yes, this one. Sorry. There was some video that we were going to watch, but I don't know if we have time for it yet. So don't worry about that. It might be something that we do. We might not do it. I'm not sure yet. I'm guessing. I'm leaning towards probably not, but I watched a couple of minutes of it. I couldn't tell if it was very, not everything in history needs to be entertaining, but if it's like 40 minutes long, I don't know. I'd rather stay awake too, so we'll see. Maybe somebody had mentioned maybe watching a film, so if I can find a decent one that I think